Galaxy Forum. I'm your host, Melissa Kaplan, and we're here to explore issues and ideas that matter to the LCC Galaxy, to discover how the work of our stars connects with the community and how the community connects with us. This episode is part of a new series called Topsy Turvy, because sometimes that's just how the world feels. As I attempt to decipher what's true in all the information that's coming at me and coming at everybody else, and remembering the importance of context and that we're all on a continuum of understanding.
And on today's episode of Galaxy Forum Topsy Turvy, we're going to dive in a bit to journalism and journalistic integrity and ethics. I'm Ami Ewald, and of course, Melissa is here with us as well. And joining us in our conversation is our guest, an LCC English professor. And he's going to give us some pointers and some insights, and hopefully we'll have a nice conversation today. And welcome to the show, Michael Kohon. I already messed it up. Mike Kohon.
Yes,
Kohon.
There you go. You got it.
There we go.
Yes.
Tell us how we need to remember to pronounce your name.
If you're in the Millennium Falcon and there are two of the pilot, there would be Kohons.
Kohons.
That's the best way to remember. I don't know. I came up with that probably sometime in my teens. I've used it ever since.
It's perfect. Tell us also a little bit about your work in journalism.
Yeah, I was a sports writer for most of my 20 years. I worked for newspapers around the state, including the State Journal here in Lansing. I also worked in television and radio. I worked in news here and there as well. So it wasn't all sports all the time. There were times when I was interviewing politicians, members of the state legislature, members of Congress also, would be for stories I worked on mostly at Channel 6. So yeah, I've been around. I've done quite a few things in my time. And also I always tell people that even if you want to be a sports writer and you think getting paid to watch games is the only thing that happens, no, because at some point an athlete or a coach is going to be accused of a crime and you need to figure out the legal system really fast. So yeah, there's also another thing that comes in is financing for things like stadiums and arenas. I had to learn a lot about Michigan tax laws and how they pertain to those things when, especially Little Caesars Arena. I did some stories about that and how the state was going to fund or maybe not fund that. So, yeah.
It sounds like a profession. As a librarian, I always say, you have to know a little bit about a lot of different things, right? And it kind of sounds like journalism is similar to that idea.
Yeah, you do. You can't just be really good at a single thing. You have to go kind of deep on a lot. It's kind of like a Renaissance type mentality. When I was a sports writer, I didn't just cover like one or two sports even. There were times, because we would cover a lot of high school sports when I worked at the State Journal, all of a sudden I had to learn about high school gymnastics because I'd go cover the state finals, and I didn't really know very much going in. But over the course of a couple of days, I read up and was able to write some stories and got compliments from people who did know the sport and really seemed to appreciate what I wrote. So that was nice.
Right.
Yeah, that Renaissance experience. I know when my background's in journalism too. I have a degree in journalism, and that was actually how I happened into journalism. Was I changed my major so many times. I ended up with all kinds of different credits, and then I took a news writing class, and I fell in love with it. And it was the days of the rise of kind of Tom Wolfe, Hunter Thompson, new journalism, and It just was like you live the story, and it was a very exciting time. And then I did a little bit of sports journalism for high schools, and really got into the arts and arts journalism, and then arts PR and promotion. But that idea of knowing a lot of different things and then being able to take deep dives into it is really, I think it's a big part of being able to be good at journalism, being curious. There's something that we hope that all journalists share, and that's kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a code, but standards and I'm sure that evolves because how we receive information, the modes of delivery change, and that impacts standards. And just, thinking of the majority of journalists that we read and consume, we know are trained professionals. And if they did things that falsified information, they would lose their jobs. And they do lose their jobs for that. So kind of starting off to think about quality journalism and standards, what do you think are those really important standards, and how can people be reminded that when they're consuming news that the large majority of journalists are working really hard to adhere to those?
Yeah, one of the main things, just like you said, Melissa, is the accountability for journalists. If a reporter gets facts wrong, there are different degrees of wrongness. I mean, if you misspell somebody's name, that's not good by any means, but it's probably not going to be a fireable offense. If you get basic core facts wrong, that's a big problem. That's a very, very big problem. And there have been people, I've worked with a couple of people who have, gotten fired because their work was not up to snuff. They would have inaccuracies in in one case I definitely remember there were fabrications, just wholesale making up things. And that's a big no-no. That's a huge no-no. You can't do that. We hear stories about that kind of thing happening from time to time, and it does leave a stain on the profession, and it's very hard to come out from underneath. I'll never forget, there was a writer for the New York Times back when I worked at the State Journal who was fired after fabricating a bunch of stories. It made national headlines, a really, really big deal. And I was out covering I think it was a boys basketball game in Hazlitt, and somebody came up and really seemed angry about the whole thing. Is like, why should we trust you guys? And I was like, well, I'm not that person. And I got fired from the Times, for starters. And my motto, one of my mottos in life is always, you got to trust somebody at some point. You really can't go around in life and just point at every person around you and say, I don't trust you, I don't trust you, I don't trust you. This isn't the X-Files. There's one thing that Gen X has kind of somewhere in the back of our mind is trust no one. At some point you do have to trust somebody. And hopefully you can put your trust in good journalism. And the reason is journalists serve a very important role in a democracy. I mean, it's a core element of democracy. And, we're often referred to as the fourth estate. We're the ones who watch the government and make sure that they're not just doing the things they're supposed to do, but they're also not doing the things they're not supposed to do. Like it's both of those things. And somebody needs to be able to do that. Now, if you think about countries where there's an autocracy, where nobody's allowed to question the government, we're talking places like North Korea, definitely communist era, Cuba, Russia, by and large. If you question the government and you criticize the government, in Russia, you could end up like falling out of a window, as they like to say. In the United States, you can say almost anything you want about politicians, and there's no repercussions whatsoever. But part of that is also criticizing and making sure that people are held accountable. And that's where the media really, what its sole biggest function and purpose is. I always say that as a sports writer, I had one of the most worthless jobs on earth because I was covering sports. Like, really, at the end of the day, how much does it matter?
A lot.
Well, I mean, it's a quote I actually got from Rick Riley, who was a columnist for Sports Illustrated for decades. And he said something to the effect of, if there's a nuclear winter, I'm the most useless person on earth. And he said it tongue in cheek, but I mean, there's a little bit of truth in there too. But a good reporter and good journalist always brings forward, here's what's happening, and allows, and this is the key element here, allows the public, the readers, the audience, whoever, to decide what to think about what's going on. And these days, that's a really hard distinction. There are many media outlets out there that have blurred the line between fact and opinion, and they've kind of morphed them into like the same thing. And the biggest, I don't want to sound too mean here, but I really don't like them. The primetime cable news programs, they are nothing but opinion. And they go around and tell you, oh, we're all facts. You know, we don't put spin on anything. It's just, it's a top. That's how much spin there is on those shows. They don't really have, I mean, they'll ground their opinion in some sort of fact sometimes, maybe even most of the time, if I squint hard enough. But they try to tell their audience what to think. And reporters, journalists generally do not do that. They just say, here's what somebody said, here's what happened, and then let the audience figure out what it thinks about the situation.
Yeah, I think that there is often a confusion, in part a lot dealing with the cable news and that of what is the difference between a journalist and a political pundit or political commentary versus news, and it comes from both sides, whatever cable news, but they have these people, and like you said, they're sort of telling you what to think and how to think about something and offering their opinions. So I think that's a very good point to sort of bring out. I also wanted to comment on that idea of what is the purpose of a newspaper originally, right? It is to tell you sort of the basics. What happened, where it happened, who was involved, you know, who, what, when, where, why, right? The common things. So in teaching students information literacy and library instruction and stuff, we try and distinguish a lot between, you know, what is an opinion piece or an editorial that you find in a newspaper versus, or political commentary that you're hearing maybe on the news versus, you know, just a news story telling you this is what happened, and the basics of the facts of the matter.
Yeah, it's interesting. The history of newspapers, there's almost like a coming full circle of the mix of fact and editorial. Originally, broadsheet newspapers were nothing but opinion. The goal, there's usually some rich person, because printing presses were very, very expensive back in the day, still are, but only very rich people could afford them, and they were pushing their agenda on the masses. And when enough newspapers kind of entered the marketplace, so to speak, that's when the move toward fact-based journalism, where you have just tell people what happened, let them decide, mentality started to come around for journalists, and the core ethics that we see these days at most major news outlets really came into place. Now, newspapers, I always say newspapers are always the best at doing that, as saying here's a wall between these two things. There are some newspapers that don't really like to do that, but by and large, your local newspaper does a great job of that. But the cable news, it's that mushing of the two again, almost like the original broadsheets, and that's, it drives me mad. I will poke my head into cable land once in a while just to see what's going on there, but by and large, I try to avoid it, just because I prefer to just get the facts, and then if I need to make a decision about how I feel about a thing, I'll just do it on my own.
Yeah, that's so true. You just know whichever cable station you pick, you're going to get their point of view and their whole panelist point of view on any particular topic, and that can be reassuring when you pick, align with whatever your outlook is. But it also I think it really limits. But it's sort of human nature to want that reinforcement. I think this, and so I'm going to reinforce that by consuming information that reinforces that.
Yeah.
and there are, it's not that those are not legitimate sources, but they do have that bias. And with something I always think about is the limited amount of time that people have and the amount of information. How do you distinguish from something that has a real severe bias and also something that I learned about, I didn't know about until Amy mentioned it, something called pink slime local news sources.
Yeah, so the pink slime newspapers, and this is kind of coming about you kind of find these websites. They look like a news source. They have the traditional news names, like I think there's the Ann Arbor Times, the Lansing Sun. I saw one today, the Michigan Star or something like that. So, traditional newspapers usually have things like Gazette and Star and Sun. We know that the Times. So they kind of have this template. And really what it is, though, is people pay to have stories published and promoted on these. Most of the time they are, or they'll pull local press releases, from local city governments and even libraries and stuff like that. And then they post that and make it look like a news story. It's just a press release, though. Mm-hmm. So, and there's no actual, on the ground reporting, like how you mentioned, Mike, about going out to cover the basketball game in Hazlitt. There's no reporter going out to cover that basketball game in Hazlitt. So they make them look very good. They're very partisan. A lot of times they're just feeding propaganda. Politicians can pay to promote the stories and things like that. So, and they're growing. And Michigan actually has quite a few. We have over 40 of them.
Wow.
Yeah. And I did just read a statistic that altogether there's over 1,200 throughout the United States. So again, people pulling news from an organization that is not necessarily a real news organization.
Yeah. So one of the reasons these have come about is there are vacuums and news deserts across the United States. So with the advent of the internet, I could go really deep on this, but I'll try to give you the Cliff's Notes version. The internet made advertising revenue, it dropped a lot for a lot of media outlets. Most newspapers made money off classified ads, and literally Craigslist alone ripped a lot of that away from. Now you still get like the car dealership that advertises in the local newspaper or the furniture store. You still get those, obviously, but classified ads was a real big moneymaker for most newspapers across the country. And when that revenue started to go down, people got laid off. That was kind of like the mid 2000s to the late 2000s. The housing crisis did not help out by any means. And it left a lot of cities either with much smaller newspapers or sometimes no newspaper whatsoever. A lot of newspapers closed down in the late 2000s because the revenue just it cratered in a lot of places. And that gave opportunity for people to come in and do just what you described. Start websites usually because they're cheap. There's no printing press, and anybody can start a website for free. I mean, and with just a little bit of investment, you can make a decent website.
Right.
And with that, they're able to publish anything they want. And we can talk about communication theory to the end of time. One of the core elements of it is that when everybody is able to say whatever they want, not everybody is able to express themselves in ways that maybe they should. And it goes to, I'm going to reference comic books at least another time today, I'm sure. As Uncle Ben told us, with great power comes great responsibility. And when you have the ability to tell hundreds of thousands, millions of people what you think, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. Well, if you're going to set up a website that looks like a legitimate news outlet, and you don't provide legitimate news, you're misinforming the public. And that's a big problem. And we've seen that happen again here in Lansing. I'm familiar with a lot of the websites you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I don't go to them, I don't page, I don't give them the traffic, but I know they exist. Once, I think a year or so, I'll poke my head and just to remind my students, hey, these things are still out there. And some people just don't know how to differentiate from legitimate news and real fake news.
So how do you do that? And I just want to mention pink slime. I looked that up because it's such a vivid phrase, a vivid descriptor. And pink slime is a meat byproduct that's used as filler to make. Yeah, I know.
I didn't know that's where
listeners. You
from.
Can't see Mike's reaction, but he's like eyes open, like in shock. Yeah, because that's we talked about that. That's where it comes from. So it's like your filling, taking something that the idea of it should be quality, but you're extending it with something that really makes it kind of poor quality. Like, ooh, who wants to eat that? Who wants to consume that? So, how do you tell the difference? I just wanted to insert that.
By and large, if a media outlet's been around for a long time, you can trust it, because if it constantly published falsehoods or just flat out lies, it would be gone. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. I'm not saying that a new media outlet that's legitimate cannot rise and be good and do good work. We've seen, especially in the age of the internet, a lot of online publications, online only, do extremely well. But if it's something you've never heard of before, take a look and see who owns it. Get it. If you see like a byline, see what else that person has written. And what you find, especially in the age of AI, some of these people, I'm putting air quotes there, they're not really people. They're just made up pseudonyms. And sometimes it's just AI kicking out something that looks legitimate, but it really isn't. And Amy, one of the things that you mentioned, just copying and pasting press releases, that's a journalistic no-no right there. If you ever see that, that's an outlet that's either way too lazy to hire somebody to actually go do some journalistic work, which would include asking people follow-up questions. When City Hall says, hey, we're going to, change something that maybe cost residents money in some way, shape, or form, either lowering or increasing the cost, a good journalist goes and asks, well, what are the costs and benefits here? Like, what are people getting? What are they missing? And the City Hall is going to put a good spin on it and say, hey, this is everybody's going to win here. There's never all winners. There's always a loser somewhere, especially when it comes to government and its decisions. And those are the kinds of things that you can look for. If you Google my name, I'm sure there's still a bunch of stories out there. I haven't been a working journalist in some time because I've been teaching. But, if I pop back onto the scene, somebody could sit there and go, oh, hey, this guy's done a bunch of stuff. Again, that doesn't mean that new people can't come in and do work. But at least like there should be an editor listed somewhere, and that person has a resume that you could pull up and see, oh, they used to work at this place. They've done this before. They've won these awards maybe.
Yeah. And I know you, Amy, have done classes. And I think I know we have a notes section for each podcast episode, and we could include some links, because the information that you've put together is really wonderful in terms of how do you analyze what's legit and what's not. And we don't have time to go into that today. I can't believe we're already nearing our end. We probably have about 5 more minutes. So we want to save this for talking, but we can put links in that would be helpful to our listeners for that. You mentioned everyone can say what they want. There's all these sources out there to navigate. There's also the propensity of take bits and pieces of what people have said and use those, take them out of context. I mentioned context. I just want to share a brief story, because I will start by saying I'm highly embarrassed that I fell prey to my own lack of sort of seeking context for something I heard on the radio this past weekend and jumped on it. I heard a statement saying they're coming for our jobs. I'd been listening to This American Life on this wonderful station, Michigan Public, and I wrote the news editor, and I got a wonderful response right away. He had listened to the whole context, and he explained that what preceded that statement, what I hadn't heard, was that the broadcaster was talking about a Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp program for students in broadcasting, and in jest was saying they're coming for our jobs. I heard my hyper-focus attention on such subjects and concerns made me think, why is he saying that? Why? And I was wrong. I didn't hear the context. And that, for me is I try and consume all kinds of things and be really thoughtful about it. And as I mentioned, we're all on a continuum. many people don't have time to think about it that way. How do you know when what you're getting is something out of context or something that's legit?
One of the best things to do is if it's a story that could appear in multiple publications, look at multiple publications. If you live near Detroit, anything that shows up in the Free is probably going to show up in the news as well, and vice versa. Lansing, unfortunately, we only have one newspaper. We do have 2 TV stations that have newsrooms, and you can take a look at all 3 of them to see if they all covered them, and they may cover from different angles and provide more context to stories just based on that. One other thing that you mentioned, Melissa, that I think would be helpful for listeners, there's a radio program out of New York, another public radio program called On the Media. And it has a series they call the Breaking News Consumer Hand Guides. And I think they've done like a dozen of these, maybe 2 dozen of them on their website. And they, I think, are very useful to people if they want to become more literate about the media and how it works. And hey, if you hear a buzzword or something happens, here are the things to look for, here are the things to avoid. And I think those would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, and I would say that too about checking sort of multiple outlets, right? Google, it's like news.google.com. If you go their page, they'll give you sort of a top story. In fact, I was just looking at it before and had something about somebody, a famous person was indicted and charged with some different things. But they gave an article from the New York Times, an article from the New York Post, another article. So you can kind of see across different news outlets and on the same story. How are they reporting it? And then when you kind of see points where they all converge, they all seem to kind of be saying the same thing. That to me is, well, that's probably what's the closest to the truth, or the truth that we're going to see. And then also, I was also thinking too, sort of with those pink slime newspaper ones, you can, when I clicked on the one for the Michigan Star, there was maybe 2 people listed. I think there was an editor who his contact information was from Tennessee. So it's not even in
nice and local to Michigan.
Yep, yeah, that's very local. And then, they just had one other contact person. So it's not something like the New York Times, Washington. These places have editorial boards and fact checkers and lots of people on staff who are working to put out a good publication and a solid news story.
I think we need a part 2 to this. I can't believe our time is up. It's up. I mean, we need to wrap it up, but I think Amy and I have more questions, and I know you have more to share, Michael. So I think, we should definitely plan to continue this conversation. So Mike Kohon, thank you so much for joining us. Mike, who's a LCC professor of English and journalism here with a great background in journalism. Really appreciate this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
I'm Melissa Kaplan.
And I'm Ami Ewald.
And you have been listening to Galaxy Forum on LCC Connect. We will include in our notes a variety of links, and we hope you check those out. And you can also reach any of us that way as well. Thanks for listening.